to another episode of Wicked Darkness. I'm Kathy, the host, and welcome back to season 2 for us. With me tonight, I have Steve.
Hello.
I have Andy.
Hello.
I have Mika.
Hi.
I have Renee.
Hi.
And I have Kevin.
Hello, everybody.
So, like I said, this is season 2, so we have a lot of things that are going to be coming up this year. New adventures, new people. We added some people to the team on our off season, which is exciting. I hope you guys know what you're getting yourselves into. I'm just saying. Suckers. No, I'm kidding.
Bring it on.
You guys are doing great. You guys put up with us already, so, you're doing fantastic. All right, so tonight we are going to be talking about the one of the most haunted locations in New Orleans or New Orleans, or however you want to say it, depending on what part of the country you're from.
Kathy, they say Nolans.
There you go.
Nolans.
Yeah.
That's what I'm saying. Depends on where you are in the country, in the world. There's always a way of saying it, and you've been there, so you know exactly how they're going to say it. So we're going to be talking about LaLaurie Mansion and the history behind it, and also the madam of the home, which is Delphine LaLaurie. And I really didn't know much about this location until you guys brought it up. I'd seen it probably once on like Haunted History back in the day, but I really didn't know that much about it. I know that there is a lot going on in New Orleans. There's a whole lot of history back then, even to today. And somehow this one fell through the cracks for me. I didn't know anything about it until you.
I didn't know much about it either till I mentioned it to you and my friend Heather Kelly. Hello, Heather Kelly.
Hey, Heather.
She watches every single or listens to every one of our episodes. So
well,
she started telling me about it, and I said, "Hey, I'll take it to the group and see if they want to talk about it." And so that's how I heard about it. Really, I mean, I think I did see an episode with Jack Osborne and the woman he did his ghost hunting with. I think they were the first group that was allowed to go inside and do an investigation.
Because it is not a place that you can go in and visit.
No.
Right, guys? You guys have been there. Kevin and Andy, you guys have actually been to the location.
Yeah, it's a private residence, so you can't, it's not open to the public. It actually belonged to Nicolas Cage for a while, and then he went bankrupt.
2010, yeah, and then he went bankrupt and lost it. Yep.
Go figure. Doesn't he also have, I believe it's down there. He already has his mausoleum where he's going to be.
He does. I have a picture of it because all these women would kiss his mausoleum and there's lipstick marks all over it. I didn't do it. I'm like, who would do that? But
yeah, he's able to get kisses, but you go over to Madame Delphine and you cannot touch hers anymore. How is that even?
He's not in there yet. So
yeah,
I think maybe that's it. I don't know. And his looks like a big pyramid. So all the rest of them look like old fashioned mausoleums you see in the movies. His looks like a big white pyramid.
Well, I can tell you his is not original because there is a cemetery in South Carolina in Charleston. And there is actually a mausoleum that is already a pyramid. So he's behind the 8 ball on that one.
I don't know it, but yeah.
He needs to get a little bit more original, but
when we were there, that's in Cemetery 1, and when we were there and did the tour, that's the only piece of property he still owns in New Orleans is that mausoleum. Otherwise, everything else he had to give back because of the bankruptcy.
Wow. That kind of sucks for him. I mean, good for the people that now own the mansion. I mean, it's their win, but his loss. Did he even live there, or did he not live there?
I think it was just another property to have. You know what I mean? With stars and extremely rich people, they just have properties all over.
I don't know that he Lisa Maurice lived there. Could be a little closer to Elvis.
Yeah.
All right, so we're talking about this mansion, and you guys said that you can't go in it. You can only visit the outside of it, but it's also not the original mansion, correct?
Correct.
So, but is it on the same property or is it moved over a little bit from the original?
I think it's on the same spot.
It is. You're correct, Steve. It's on the same spot. So there was a big fire, and so the original mansion, I think, was burned down to maybe one story, if I remember that correctly. And I think they just built on what was left, basically.
Okay.
And a lot of what went on in that mansion was unknown to everybody until that fire happened.
Correct. Yep.
Well, actually, I think a few years before that, when supposedly one of her slaves was brushing her hair and pulled on it too tight, she was chasing her around with a whip, and the slave fell off the second floor balcony. Now it has 3 floors, and everybody thinks it always had 3, but it had 2 floors originally. And when they went to investigate, then because New Orleans had very strict rules concerning their slaves and the treatment of slaves. And so when this was a child, I believe 12 years old. So when she fell, they first sent an investigator in, and he didn't find anything to be wrong. But consequently, they took her slaves away. She had 9 slaves, and they put them back on the market, and her cousin bought them and gave them all back to her.
Oh,
So I think that was the first encounter with her and questions about her treatment of her.
When I was in New
slaves.
Orleans, because there are witch tours and vampire tours and ghost tours, when I happened to be there, there was a ghost tour going on, and they were talking about that little girl, and I think her name was Layla or something close to that.
Like Leah,
And
I think, or
Leah, yeah,
Yeah.
and she's one of the entities that is known to haunt that property. Like
Yep.
one of the ghost person was saying that, at one point they felt her tugging on their jacket outside of the mansion, and I don't know how any of that, if that's true, but she is definitely one of the spirits that's supposed to still be there.
Yep.
All right. So the property itself, the address is 1140 Royal Street. And we were just saying, it's not the original because they tore it down. But let's get back to the family itself. Now, we're talking about Madame LaLaurie, and her real name is Marie now I got to go back to my notes here. Marie Delphine. And then she was originally, her maiden name was McCartney or McCarthy because she came from Ireland. Family changed it to McCartney when they came to the United States. She was married 3 times. So LaLaurie was actually her 3rd husband, and that's how she got that name. She was born, and I didn't know this either, and my history teacher probably would yell at me about this because I'm pretty good at my history, but I didn't realize that New Orleans was actually Spanish colony first, because they don't really embrace that. That's all about the French.
Yeah.
Not a lot about their Spanish history. So that was new to me too when I was going through that. And by the way, Kimba is now with us. Hi, Kimba.
Hi, Kimba.
Hey, Kimba.
Is she there?
Can't see her either.
Kimba, you there?
First episode, like I said, we have little glitches. We're gonna get through this, guys. It's first episode, 2nd season, so we're gonna get through this. But we're gonna continue on. So anyway, she was born March 19th. Her birthday's coming up, guys. March 19th, 1787. She was actually born in the city. But at the time, like I said, it was Spanish Louisiana. And we're not sure about the death of her. They do have a death date, but it's up in the air on that one. And we'll kind of talk about that a little bit later. But the LaLaurie story actually started where everybody found out about it was on April 10th, 1834. So like I said, LaLaurie is her 3rd husband. She was widowed twice, which I thought was kind of suspicious.
Well, I'd also read that both of her previous husbands died of questionable deaths. So
it's kind of suspicious.
I heard that too. So
yeah.
Well, there was American Horror Story actually did a whole season about the mansion.
Yeah.
And so while some of it is obviously exaggerated and made up for entertainment. A lot of it actually does follow the history. If watch after you look all this up and watch the show, it's close, but it's still American Horror Story. But it's pretty fairly accurate when it comes to.
And I believe it's Kathy Bates that plays her.
It
Yes.
is.
Okay.
Yes.
I don't really watch that. I should, but I really don't watch it. But I found out about it by doing the research of this, that has some ties to it. And they did say, when I was looking up about the American Horror Story, they did say that the producers took great creativity and liberties. So they really stretched the truth as much as they possibly could because of Hollywood. But the majority of the filming happened at another house, the Grima House, which is on St. Louis Street. And probably for the best, because they were saying, they can't really do anything at the property because it's privately owned, but also because of the claims that it's cursed. So they didn't want to take their chances and try to film on location just because, the whole break a leg might actually happen. So, but yeah, so she is a widow twice over. Her family, like I said, came from Ireland, around 1730s. She was one of 5 children, and her mother was also a Marie Jane, and she was known as the widow Lecomte. I'm not good at French. French was not my subject. And as her marriage to McCartney was her second. So she learned a little something from Mama. And they were very prominent in the community. Her uncle by marriage was the governor of the Spanish American province of Louisiana and Florida during 1785 and 1791. And her cousin was the mayor of the city from 1815 to 1820, was able to get out before things got a little bad for his cousin. Talk about scandals. I mean, politicians have scandals all the time, but this would have been really bad for the family. She was only 4 years old when there was a Haitian Revolution that erupted in 1791. And that's where a lot of that, you were talking about the whole slave, the city would come in, you had to have certain rules to provide for your slaves or the enslaved people that you had. And that was because at the time, now, yes, this is Wikipedia, so just give me a break here on this one. The slaveholders in southern United States and the Caribbean were very afraid of a resistance and a rebellion among the slaves. And so her uncle had been killed in 1771 by his slaves, and the revolution had inspired the local conspiracy in 1791. And then there was another conspiracy in 1794, and then in 1811, a German coast uprising, all of which caused many slaveholders to abuse slaves even more harshly out of fear of insurrection. So let's beat the crap out of them so that they will, listen to us and abide by us, was their thought. But originally, they really didn't want to do anything because they were afraid that it was going to cause a problem. And then they changed their mind and said, okay, let's beat the snot out of them and treat them like garbage, and they will comply, because otherwise they're going to have to go wherever and it's going to be worse. And so, not that I agree with any of that, but different times back then, I couldn't even imagine living in that time period because it is so much different than what it is today. So in the 1800s, Delphine married when she was 13 years old. Her first husband, she married June 11th, 1800 at 13. And she married a high-ranking Spanish royal officer. And then they went, they had the Spanish colonies and everything. And then he was supposed to go to France for a little bit during they had that 7-year war or whatever. He was supposed to go to France, And something happened. And he was then appointed general for Spain and the territories of New Orleans. And then, he was called to court for Spain. And somehow, some way, a few days after they found out that she was, very, very, very pregnant, he was dead. And then she gave birth to their daughter. So she basically was a widow at like 17 with a new baby. But that didn't last long, because at 21 she married number 2, and he was a prominent banker. She always went for money. She was very, well-to-do from day one, but she stayed in that prestigious ranking of the people. So he was a prominent banker, a merchant, a lawyer, a legislator, and they had a home at 409 Royal Street, and it was a little villa. She had 4 children with him, and then of course all their daughters were like Marie Louise, Louise Marie, Marie Louise Jean. They're very, very...
I don't know how you keep track of them if they all have the same name.
Right. Well, I can't say anything because my dogs is Daisy Bella and Daisy Sue, so I'm just as bad. So, I mean, but we call them Bella and Sue, but I don't know. What are they? You got Louise, you got Marie, Louise Marie, Marie Louise Jean, Marie Louise Pauline, Louise Marie Laurie.
Sorry. So you
Just
just
so
say
hard.
Marie, and everybody comes. They all listen, right?
Oh, but we got a Jean-Pierre, so we're good here.
Got a boy.
We got a boy.
It was very common during that time period to name your children after the parents and the grandparents. So that's why the names got repeated. Because that was what you did in social society.
Well, they tried to change it up with the Louise Marie, because they got 2 Marie Louises, one Pauline and one Jean, and then you got Louise Marie Laurie. Yeah. Okay, and her second husband died in 1816, so they were married for like 8 years, and then she went on. So 1816, so she was raising those kids by herself until 1825, when she married the physician, Dr. LaLaurie, who, by the way, was 15 years her junior. She was a little cougar. Well, she was married when she was 13, so by now she's pretty much old, and God help her, she's probably all dried up now. She bought the property where the mansion's at. So in 1831, 6 years after they got married, she bought the property, which she managed in her name with hardly any involvement of her husband. So it's like, shush, Junior, go sit in the corner, go make me money, but this is my establishment. It's kind of how she, because it sounds like some of these kids might have been around the same age as her husband. And then, yeah, you were saying, Steve, it was a 2-story mansion.
Yep.
Complete with an attached slave quarters. She lived there with her 3rd husband and 2 of her daughters. And then she maintained that central position in society. My goodness. This woman. Good for her. She seemed to move up, she went from soldier to physician, got a little banker in there in the mix, but was able to go from being the junior to the senior. And, it sounds like they didn't really have a very good relationship, though. Do you guys hear about how that went into play?
Well, I don't know if I heard this or it was on American Horror Story or where the heck this one's coming from, but I remember them saying that she thought her husband was sleeping with one of the slaves, and then that's how it all started, one of the slave women. So she then decided she hated them all. So she had to, take out her retribution on it, because that's what happened, is he took up with one of the slave women.
Which was not uncommon back then. I'm sorry.
No, it was not at all.
The
We don't know
fellas
about
just,
Thomas Jefferson. No.
right. And now look at it. That family is very prominent. They kept going throughout the history. They're still around. And the two families now come together, and they now recognize each other as like siblings somehow, and cousins or whatever, however it goes down the line. But yeah, it wasn't uncommon back then. It was like a common thing. But heaven forbid you diss this woman at any point, because she lays down the law. And she actually filed for divorce, which isn't hard to do, it sounds like. Like, if you talk bad, like if my husband was here right now and he like said something nasty to me in front of you, I could file for divorce. That's exactly what happened with them. It was, he wasn't very nice to her in front of people. And she's like, you know what? I'm done with you. I want to file for divorce. And she did. And they separated. And it was weird though, because they always had parties at their location. Like, they were high society. Like, they had a lot of money. Did you guys hear how much money they had back then?
No.
Like $4 million back then.
A lot of money.
That is a ton of money. And most of it she came with. It wasn't the doctor. She came with most of that. So they had parties, like, it wasn't like a social event that you would have maybe like once a year, every 6 months or something. They had them weekly. That's a lot. And it wasn't where, oh, well, here you go. You can have a little bit of this and a little bit of that. It was, here's the champagne flowing. Let's just keep going. Party all night. I couldn't even imagine. But they kept up the persona that they were still doing well, because the night of the incident, he was actually at the mansion. When you guys were there, when you like, Andy, you heard them telling the story, did you hear what happened that night? Did they tell you, or Kevin?
I had heard that when they eventually stormed into the place, they had found a torture room where people were chained to different parts of the room, and some people were missing limbs, and just very horrific scene of what they were doing to the slaves in private.
And because I dipped on that lady telling the ghost story, I didn't pay for it. I just stuck around. Listen, actually, she had tied or chained a woman up in the kitchen next to the stove, and she was starving her and beating her. And that woman actually set the fire to get help and to get out. And once the fire started, that's when the whole town came running, and that's how they found everything, because then they had to run in, and all the neighbors were like, there's slaves in there, there's slaves in there. So they went in there to try to save the slaves, and then that's when they found everything.
Yeah, and that woman that started the fire, she had said to the people, that the firemen and everybody else, to go to the room on the second floor where no one ever comes out. That's what I had read, one of the transcripts.
The torture room, yeah.
Yeah, that's the one. They said there's the room on the next floor where they take the slaves up, but no one ever comes down from there.
So yeah,
that's kind of weird.
They also, the night that this all happened, they had a party. Like, they had everybody in the society at their home having a party, and then somebody said, hey, there's smoke and there's flame. So they went outside, went across the street, and they continued the party. Like, even the musicians walked out, set up camp, kept playing the music, the champagne's still flowing, and they're watching the mansion burn.
True New Orleans style,
And that's when they were like, okay, they go in and she was trying to kill herself or whatever. And yeah, that's how it all started. But she was just like nonchalant, like, oh, here, let me just fill your cup. Here, come over here. What are you doing next Sunday? Are we gonna go shopping on Monday? Like, nothing happened. Like, oh, my house is on fire. It's okay. Let's just keep the party going. Like, who does that?
Well, I had read that they had asked for keys to try to get into the mansion, and she refused to give the keys to to get in, and bystanders had to break the doors down.
Yeah. And they finally get in, and they're trying to put a now, okay, back then you don't have like the fire service that you have nowadays.
It's your little girl.
That's my daughter. See, this is what I say. This happens all the time. So it's not like the fire service that we have nowadays. You call 911, the dispatcher takes your information. They've got whatever they have in front of them for their listing of what apparatuses need to go, what departments need to go, how many things need to be there, whatever. And then, the firefighters get on their rigs and they go out through the doors, get on their, their trucks, and out the door they go. Police show up. You got rescue squads. You've got, all the fire apparatuses you can think of. That's not what happened back then. Back then it was the bucket brigade. I mean, literally, here's like a water pump that you sit there and you pump and pump, and there's a bucket that's at everybody's house, and everybody grabs their buckets and they stand in line and they just pump up all the water, and then they hand the bucket down to the next person, throw the bucket water on the location, and hope to God they can get it under control. Which it sounds like they were able to get most of it under control. It wasn't like it went like super crazy at that point. Because like you said, they were trying to get into another room, and her and her husband said, no, you're not getting in that room.
Mm-hmm.
And it took them a while, though. It wasn't something that was like instant break down the door like you see on, TV, like put your shoulder into it, run at it, and it'll knock over. It took them a while. And they finally got through it, and that's when they found the horror that was behind that door. And it wasn't the same day either. It was like the next day. And it was the fire marshal and like I think it was chief of police or something like that. One went one direction, one went the other direction, and then it was somebody screamed, and that's when they found everything. So, who has any of you watched the American Horror Story about this whole thing?
I did. That's
you?
one of the. I'm not a fan of all the American Horror Stories because some of them are really creepy and weird. So, like the first season is about a house and there's ghosts but I watched this one because I'd already been to New Orleans, and it's like, oh, I remember this, like, and so that one intrigued me. But yeah, some of the things they showed Kathy Bates' character doing, I mean, if that stuff was really going on, like the whole neighborhood would have smelled. Like, you know what I mean? It would have been, and I'm surprised it didn't, and I knew they were rich, so people probably just thought they were in French, and I don't know. Although I will say, being in New Orleans, and Kevin might be able to attest to this, the whole city kind of smells. Like, it's no joke. Like,
it has a funk.
The sewage, they're below sea level. So,
Right.
Yep.
And before they had indoor plumbing, they just threw that all out on a street. And so I can imagine back then they probably smelt nothing. But still, yeah, they definitely took liberties and their creativity of telling that story. What I also did like is they incorporated other episodes of like other things that they tell in New Orleans, like about the Axeman and his origin story, and other things that you hear when you go down there and you take these tours. They incorporated it, so it wasn't all just Delphine and LaLaurie the whole time, but she was definitely the main character. I think there were witches. Now that I think about it, there was like a coven of witches also involved in this story too.
So did they say when you guys did the tour, did they say how close the other, like it's in the French Quarter, so how close was the mansion back then to other properties? Was there
Yeah.
like a distance? Anybody know that?
If you look at some of the pictures that I've seen, I mean, there was just like right in the middle of a
It's right in the
busy,
middle of Main Street.
yeah.
Right, but back
Okay,
then,
just a
we're talking
second.
like 1700s, was that it's still like it is now? Or was that,
I mean, there was buildings right next door, and there was businesses, and I mean, it was a thriving main street.
okay,
Yeah, and again, like I said, so there is Bourbon Street, and literally like a block and a half over, that's Royal Street, and they run the same direction, which I want to say is east and west, and then there's streets interconnecting both of them, and they're all like connected. It's all below sea level. Everything had to work together, and yeah, I imagine that it wasn't like mansions back in the day that had 200 acres. I think they were right next door to somebody.
Yep.
now Kim, but you do traveling for a living. I take it you've been to New Orleans too?
New Orleans is my favorite city. I've been there many, many times, and I've been to the LaLaurie Mansion many times. And so I know it well. And the street that it's on, all of those buildings there have been there. And so they're close by. It kind of sits, if you've got the two sidewalk streets, it kind of sits this way. The mansion faces into almost like a courtyard of the street, and so there is a balcony that faces the actual street itself. So when you're coming up the sidewalks, you're coming up the sides of the mansion. And there was one of the first things that tipped them off was there was a young slave, a young girl who actually fell from the balcony there, and found out later that Madame LaLaurie had sort of chased her onto the balcony, and she jumped to get away from being whipped, and so she fell. And so that was one of the first indications that was things going on there.
I believe she's buried in the courtyard.
That's correct. And her ghost continues to like be there. But that said, with the party and the fire and those sorts of things that happened that night, there wasn't that rushing in like we think about today. But when the police and the firemen did go into the building, their reports were saying that what they saw with the mutilation of the slaves was so intense that two of them were physically ill the minute they walked in there. So I do imagine that the stench around the mansion was evident when the doors were open, but they kept those doors and windows locked all the time. So you're not going to know that it's going on behind the closed doors. But they said once they went in that it was so horrific that they were physically ill. And there was people who were so mutilated. They were shackled around their necks. What parts of their limbs were there. The cook who had started the fire had been shackled to the stove. And so, yeah, so just all of it was just like one thing on top of another, on top of another. And because her husband was a doctor, that was part of the experimentation of what happens if I break this bone and I set it in this direction? What happens if I cut someone open and just leave them? You know, and so they were doing all of this medical experimentation. And I think because he was a doctor, the neighbors probably didn't react the way they might have otherwise, you know, as far as the smells and things.
Mm-hmm. Well, I know, when I was on the fire service, I've been to a lot of death calls, and I can attest that once you smell death, it'll never leave you. And one particular one, like you said, they had the door closed and you really can't smell it. Well, that is true. Because one call I went on to, as soon as they opened the door, it hit you. And I wasn't even near the door. I was probably a good 150, 200 feet away from the door. And I could smell it like I was standing next to the body. It's just a horrendous smell that you will never, ever forget. And New Orleans is hot all the time, it seems like. And when I had this,
very, very humid.
Yeah.
So
And
smells like that, don't like ruminate. If you have dry air, it'll ruminate, but it's
Right.
so humid, it'll stay right there.
right. And that's
Very
when
humid.
I had this experience, it was in July, and it was like one of the hottest summers that we had. And it just came right at you like it was a plume of smoke hitting you right in the face. So, I'm assuming that was like the same thing for them, especially if the door was as thick as they're saying it was. But can you imagine being one of the people that are behind that door and had to smell that like on a daily basis? And when you were talking about the bones being set, there was reports of, and I don't want to gross anybody out, but they reset this woman's bones so many times they made her look like a human crab. Like they literally broke her bones to form her into a crab-like pose.
That's because what it said was they had her living in a cage,
Yeah.
like a small animal, like a dog cage, and that's how they wanted her in there. That's why they broke her arms and legs and reset them in that way so she could fit in this cage, which is just.
And they would do lobotomies. And then
Yeah.
there was like a report that they walked into one of the people that were in there that had a lobotomy done, had a wooden spoon sticking out of his head.
Oh, I heard that too. I did hear that too. I remember that now that you're saying that.
Yeah, and they had it. Now they talk about it in the movie The Mummy, when they mummify a body, the process. And I don't know if you guys remember when they talk about in the movie when they're sitting in by one of the tombs and they're trying to talk about what happens when they're going to mummify a body. And so Rachel Weisz, who's the actress, talks about how they stick a stick up into their nose and like a hot poker and scramble things around and then rip your brains out through your nostril. And then, Brendan Fraser, who is playing Rick, says, "Don't put me up for mummification," And she's like, "No, you'd be dead at that point." They actually did that to these people when they were alive. There are reports that they would stick stuff up the person's nostril and scramble the brains around while they were alive to see what would happen to them. Again, these are alleged reports. It wasn't something that was completely documented. But these were things that they talked about, like a woman they found with her intestines wrapped around the outside of her body like a belt. This is some sick stuff. Like they covered honey over the person's face and had black ants kind of cover over the honey and start eating the honey to see what would happen. Then they were saying that the lucky ones were the ones that died. and that they took a lot of these people to the local hospital, which wasn't very far away, and most of them, died instantly because of their wounds that they had, gotten from these people. But there were a couple that lived a little bit longer. Like they've had it where the face was being peeled back and held back, like they pinned them back onto the person's skin. So all you saw was like the muscles.
So one of the things I read, just today, was saying that, again, there's so many different weird reports on all this, but they took the survivors to the local jail and they let lines of people come in for public viewing. They estimated between 4,000 and 5,000 people walk through this jail to look at these people.
Yeah, they did have them on display to see what they had been through.
Yeah.
I don't know why. I mean, I guess we do know why. It's curiosity. They have those human anatomy displays that go around the country and everything. And of course, we go in and we're like, oh, that's what your body looks like. And they have no skin, or they have like just the bones, or they'll have like just the veins and the arteries and stuff like that.
I went to see that at the public museum, Milwaukee Museum.
Oh yeah, body
Very
worlds.
interesting. Yeah.
Right. And you just see how the body, and there it's supposed to be scientific, and they're, the LaLaurie family probably was saying it was scientific too. But was it really, or was it just their sick fantasies that they were playing out?
Well, the crab disfiguration reminds me of some of the movies that you watch where there's possession that takes place, demonic
Yes.
possession. And a lot of these people will sort of disfigure into this crab sort of walk.
Yep.
So it kind of makes you wonder, is that sort of where this comes from? Is it from the history of New Orleans? I
Right.
mean, just normal people just probably don't think of that stuff.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, they're steeped in history. Their history goes back farther than we know of different things. They got the voodoo down there. They got the voodoo. They got the Haitian stuff that they do. There's all these different things that are crammed into this little city. So who's to say that they, it wasn't a religious thing that they came up with? I don't know. It's a possibility.
Experimentation.
Right. And, back then, medicine isn't the way it is now. You have to start somewhere. And as sad as that sounds, they did, do that to people to find out scientifically what's going to happen to the body so that we can fix it. I mean, we started out very rudimentary.
I mean, that's true, but I don't know if dipping someone's head in honey and putting black ants all over them, I don't know what you're going to get out of that.
Right.
What medical purpose that would serve, because how many people find themselves in a situation with their head full of honey and black ants all over them?
Well, it's true, but you got to get anaphylaxis somewhere. So
Even back then, though, Kathy, they still had the Hippocratic Oath, right? That goes back to way before they even had the,
mhm.
Physicians started treating people, way back to the Greeks, way back then. So they had the Hippocratic Oath, and the number one rule of the Hippocratic Oath is do no harm.
Right.
So that's not, you can't say, well, that's for science. They're sick. That's what that's for.
But you and I both know, being in the healthcare field, that there are some sick doctors out there that will push the limits.
Oh, yeah.
There's
I just watched some documentary about some real doctor who was supposed to go into research and decided to do surgery and hurt a lot of people. And it's a true story. So, and that would just happen a few years ago. So
Right.
yes, there's definitely people
I think I know
there.
which one you're talking about.
Yeah.
He was supposed to be helping with the valves, with the heart. That one?
No, this one was doing back surgeries
Oh,
on people. Like
this one.
complex neurosurgery on people's spines, and he was killing them and paralyzing them.
Oh, well, there's another one that did the same thing. It was like trachs, and he was supposed to, okay, so going back to talking about scientific ways, a lot of scientists, doctor-wise, will start, and I know people are not going to be happy about it, but they start on animals.
Oh, yeah.
And that's where they start their process. That's where they start their research. And then they go from the animals, they bring it into the humans. And so in this case, and just like the one that I watched, he bypassed the animals altogether and went straight for human and used them as the experiment. So who's to say Dr. LaLaurie didn't do the same thing, go, you know what, I'm going to skip the whole, let's take the mouse and the rat and everything else and test it on them. And let's just go right to these people. Because to them, they
weren't equal to other people. Like they saw them as less. So it's, for them, maybe you know what I mean? They didn't see them as equals. So that they were not the same.
Well, they saw them as property. I mean, they were property.
Exactly. Yes.
Right. To do as they chose to do with them.
Yep.
It was whatever. Nobody is going to question them, even though the city had it set up that you have to treat them with some kind of respect. And there are certain rules you have to follow. Obviously, like we all know, money talks. So you could always pay somebody off with all that money and go, shh, you know nothing, but let me keep doing what I'm doing. And I'll keep, putting more stuff into your pockets.
That might have been the reason for the parties.
Yeah. I mean,
so you bring the people of high society to your house and say, hey, don't tell anybody what's going on here, and not, I'll grease your pockets a little bit.
Right.
Keep having fancy parties,
And that's a possibility. I mean, we don't know what was happening back then. Society was a lot different back then. And it was all about the image and, who you knew and who you rubbed elbows with. It was a whole different story back then. And, her kids were around too. I mean, let's not forget that she had kids still in this house too, and they got to see all this. So how did that affect her children? Because I'm assuming it affected her children in some way, positive or negative. Our kids learn from how we are. So they go and they mimic what we do. So, does her children eventually start doing stuff? Or did they go the opposite and go, I saw this and I don't want anything to do with this. I'm going to go completely opposite. But her children were around during this time period. So, I mean, there's that. And
weren't they instrumental in getting her out of there? We didn't get to that part yet. But once everybody found this out, the town kind of went in and ousted her, and she went to France.
Right. But she still had two daughters still living with them at the time.
I know. I thought her kids went with her, though. Like, that family
her daughters did, yeah. But her older children stayed, I believe. Or at least a couple of them at least stayed. And yeah, we'll kind of talk about that when, probably the next episode we'll talk about that. I think right now, we're going to take this as the ending of our first episode. So if anybody wants to hear like the haunting stories of it and what happened to Delphine and her family really at the end, you're going to have to come back for episode 2. So I think we're going to leave everybody on a cliffhanger. What do you guys think?
I like it.
Yeah.
You like it? Yep. Yes. We're all, yep. We're all done.
Gotta have you come back for more. That's how it goes. All right. So we're going to say goodbye. And we'll talk again next episode about everything that we didn't talk about this time, which is what happened to the LaLaurie family, what actually happened to the mansion, and what is happening to it today. What everybody has experienced in these last 200 years. You're going to have to come back for episode 2, which we'll go and dive into all that. So until then, my famous words that I tell everybody all the time: for our skeptics, keep us grounded; for our believers, keep believing. I'm Kathy. Good night.
Night.
Good night.
Right.
Night.